Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's lesson. Today we'll be talking about Chapter 12 on marijuana. And out of all the drugs we've been covering or will cover in this course, none have probably been met with so many differing opinions and controversy and debate as far as its uses, its effects on the body, and especially the legality of marijuana. It's been around for a long time. It's recently been legalized in the state of New York. Other states have pretty stringent laws about it. It's still regulated federally as a Class 1 drug. We'll talk about that in a few moments. The question to ask yourself is, do you feel marijuana is a problem to society? And if so, why or why not? Just think about that to yourselves for a few moments. Remains, like I said, classified as a Schedule 1 drug. And remember, Schedule 1 drugs are listed by the federal government, the DEA, as highly addictive, and I'm putting that in quotes, with no acceptable medical uses. Even though some of you, as you've seen in your response questions, have shown quite good evidence that there has been some proven medical benefits to this drug. So even though an increasing number of states allow it for medicinal and recreational use, the federal government has still put a ban on it, which again leads to levels of controversy and debate, especially in politics. How far can the federal government supersede the rights of the states to govern their own laws and things like this? That's an ongoing thing. That's more for a class in social sciences. So, marijuana is probably, next to alcohol, one of the oldest known mind-altering substances. Records go back over 3,000 years of its use and use of the hemp plant and cannabinoids. Its use can be dated back in documents from India and Middle East, Iraq. And over the centuries, it made its way over into the Western world, being introduced to the New World, the North America, in the times of the colonial settlers. Early settlers in Jamestown, Virginia, especially planted marijuana plants, but not for its mind-altering substances. There were a lot of industrial uses for this crop, the hemp plant. Hemp plant was used to make strong ropes, fibers, clothing, sails for sailboats. There were many different industrial uses for this plant. About the mid 1800s, the marijuana product was brought in from Mexico, and with it, a lot of the racist overtones that came with the association Mexican migrant workers with marijuana. And we did speak about some of that. We talked about the history of drug legislation, with Aslinger making his statements about Mexicans and the crime rates involved with marijuana usage. So in the late 19th century, early 20th century, marijuana was especially known for its euphoric effect, its sedative effect, its mind-altering effect, and its use was highly increased during the alcohol prohibition years, so 1929 to the late 1930s. Interestingly enough, that once prohibition was ended, the alcohol and liquor companies really banded together to put a political stronghold on trying to ban and criminalize marijuana. And as we probably mentioned before, why was that? Well, marijuana was seen as a competition for alcohol, and the alcohol companies had very strong legislative and political ties to facilitate that. So to talk a little bit about the chemistry and the pharmacology of marijuana and the cannabis plant, cannabinoids are the chemical compounds found in cannabis, and there are three major compounds that are found. The first is delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC. which you're probably more familiar with. And that's the psychoactive agent of the marijuana plant. It's what's responsible for inducing the high. It's what's looked for when people are doing drug tests, screening for substances, and that's what comes up in urine tests. And that's the part of the cannabis plant that is still illegal in some states and according to the federal government. Cannabidiol, CBD, uh, or or cannabis oil, uh, has many marketed effects, very few proven effects. Uh, One effect that's probably well agreed upon is its anti-anxiety effect. It's not psychoactive. It doesn't alter the way the mind works. The problem with getting any product with CBD or CBD oil is that you never know the potency of the compound because it is not regulated by the Federal Drug Administration. So some products tout 15 milligrams, some products tout 30 milligrams, um, but the companies have no real standards for what they measure their quality by. So that's just something to keep into mind if you're purchasing any kind of cannabidiol product. Cannabinol, CBN, is the byproduct of THC. It has shown anti-inflammatory properties and is an immunosuppressant, which may show benefit in diseases like lupus and scleroderma and other uh, autoimmune disorders. Latest research actually may show some benefit in the effects of COVID because a lot of the after effects of the coronavirus are not necessarily due to the virus itself, but are due to the massive immune response that the body puts forth to try to fight this thing off, which sometimes backfires and damages the body itself. There is a chemical called benzopyrene, which is a carcinogenic compound in marijuana smoke once it's burned and combusted. Um, Contains about 70% more benzopyrene and 50% more tar than traditional standard cigarettes. So just keep that as a point of reference. For those of you who are marijuana aficionados, there are different species of the cannabis plant, uh, which can be identified by its different shape of its leaves. There's cannabis sativa, which is the most widespread, as we spoke about, used to make rope, especially fibers, clothing, used mostly in industrial products. Cannabis indica, which originally was cultivated from India, grown for its psychoactive properties, and it's really one of the most popular species that's still grown and cultivated today. And then Cannabis ruderalis, which is marked by its shown growing season and low potency. Doesn't have the psychoactive effects of the other products. Marijuana comes in different forms. And some of this I found to be interesting. Ganja is the top leaf and flower of the female cannabis plant. Sinsemilla is similar to ganja but made from the unfertilized plant. Higher THC levels. Takes a lot more resources to grow and cultivate a fertilized plant than unfertilized plant. Bhang is lower stems and leaves and seeds and contain less THC. Kief is powder sifted from the leaves and flowers, can be pressed into cakes called hashish, which is commonly put into products such as brownies and other products. And hash oil is produced by a solvent extract, which is popular in smoking solutions. One of the more current trends of marijuana use is something called dabbing, or involving the inhalation of hash oil, similar to vaping. Some of these products contain a very high concentration of THC, up to 80%. Other terms for this product are cannabis oil, shatter, wax extracts. The THC levels of smoked marijuana have been on the rise, giving giving a rise to a very higher potency products and levels of CBD. The beneficial component has been on the decline. So marijuana is a pretty resilient plant and can grow anywhere, and pretty much, as we mentioned before, its cultivation began in history out in the East and Mideast, and it's made its way over into the Western world. And currently, about 60 to 70% of the United States supply of marijuana is grown out in California. You may erroneously think it's all brought in and smuggled in from Mexico. That might have been true at one point in time, but the importation from Mexico and other countries is way on the decline. California crops are also grown in areas like Colorado, and it requires a lot of water to grow, so California tends to struggle with droughts periodically. So as more and more laws are let up regarding the cultivation of marijuana, you may see it grown in other states. Marijuana used from Mexico has been on the decline, probably due to its legalized status in some states, and different trends and points of view regarding the use of marijuana as well. In the states that have legalized marijuana, indoor cultivation has risen in recent years and has become very lucrative for profit business. Indoor cultivation allows for production of product with higher THC levels, giving somewhat of a higher quality control. And plants can be harvested up to 4 to 6 times a year, making this a somewhat lucrative crop. Concerns about growing indoor marijuana include high energy usage, proper ventilation, and cost of maintenance. Now, just some interesting statistics. It's mentioned in the textbook. Worldwide, marijuana is considered to be the 4th most used drug. It says adolescent cigarette use is correlated with later marijuana use, although just remember that correlation does not necessarily mean cause. It could very well be that people who are attracted to cigarettes are looking to stimulate those dopamine receptors that are just as well hit by marijuana products as well. The jury's still out. Parents who use hard drugs have children who have a higher risk for cannabis use disorder. But again, that's a statistic that doesn't have a lot of background behind it. Are these children genetically predisposed to any type of substance use disorder? Are they predisposed just because they're more exposed to cannabis? Really doesn't give much clarification there. One thing that's interesting is the legal status of marijuana tends not to increase marijuana use among teenagers, contrary to what a lot of critics of legalizing marijuana tend to spew. So, how is cannabis and marijuana products introduced into the body? 3 major ways. The first way is through inhalation, is the most popular way, smoking and vaping. When we mentioned about pharmacology, this is one of the most efficient ways to get product into the body. The effect is onset, the duration is shorter, and it's metabolized pretty quickly in the body. Some oral products, especially hashish oil, the effects are usually somewhat stronger compared to smoking it, as it breaks the acids in the stomach and the digestive system breaks it down to more potent compounds. Oral products go through what's called first pass metabolism. Once they're introduced into the GI system and digested, the products are then transported to the liver before being introduced into the circulatory system, where some chemical breakdowns occur. And this causes a chemical change in which new molecule passes the blood-brain barrier more rapidly. The blood-brain barrier is a system of blood vessels around the brain that have very tight junctions between their cells. So it's very difficult to deliver drugs into the brain itself because of this protective mechanism. So oral products take about 36 minutes to take 30 to 60 minutes to take effect and can last a lot longer, 4 to 6 hours. And then some products involve transdermal applications or absorption through the skin through patches or other products applied directly to the skin. The effects are somewhat similar to edible marijuana. These are very popular products for local pain management and other ailments as well. So the question is, does marijuana cause physical dependence like other substances such as alcohol and cocaine? Well, heroin, I should say. Cocaine doesn't really cause physical dependence. If it does, it may be due to a heritable trait, some genetic capability, but most experts agree that physical dependence does not occur. Younger people may be more likely to become a dependent or mentally dependent because their brain is more sensitive to marijuana. But statistics show that usage usually drops as people age. The National Institute for Health estimates that almost 2.5% of adults experience marijuana use disorder. Um, and again, some psychological susceptibility can occur because the brain tends to adapt to the presence of marijuana by reducing production and sensitivity to endocannabinoid neurotransmitters, just like your other transmitters such as serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. Most experts do agree that marijuana use may result in psychological dependence or habituation. The perceived need for the drug is believed to be responsible for the compulsive use and dependency, kind of like a security blanket type situation. Chronic and long-term and heavy marijuana use can result in some withdrawal symptoms. Some of your typical signs and symptoms include nausea, vomiting, diaphoresis or heavy perspiration, irritability, rhinorrhea or runny nose, restlessness, irritability, diarrhea, lack of appetite, because one of the effects of marijuana is to stimulate appetite, insomnia, and hot flashes as well. So the research on the effects of marijuana use is always being updated and changing. Now it says the amount needed to be fatal has not yet been determined. I can say that at the time of this recording, I don't believe there's been one published report of any marijuana-related overdose death in the medical literature, so that has yet to be determined. Marijuana users seen in the emergency room has increased, but that's probably due more so to tainted products and people who have underlying medical conditions, and due to the effects of the marijuana itself during activities such as driving, sporting, boating accidents, things of that sort. There is an association with heavy marijuana use and paranoia and irritability. That's been shown in the emergency rooms as well. Now, marijuana use among adolescents has been associated with things such as poor educational outcomes, dropping out of school, poor grades, increasing thoughts of suicide or self-harming behavior, which is cutting, increased risk taking, increased risk for running away from home, skipping or cutting classes, stealing. Now again, correlation does not necessarily mean causality. These associations were highly exaggerated in the old 1930s movie Reefer Madness. And if you ever get a chance to watch that movie, it's a good way to kill an hour and a half. But among adults, the literature demonstrates use among more lower income individuals on greater welfare dependence, people who are unemployed, who've had past evidence of criminal behavior, overall lower life satisfaction. So it seems like maybe this is an easy way for people of lower socioeconomic means to somewhat self-medicate from the stresses of daily activities and daily life. And this is probably one of the more valid arguments against the legalization of marijuana is with its effects on the performance of motor vehicles. Although marijuana has not been shown to actually decrease cognitive performance, there has been reports of driving ability being affected by the presence of THC in the bloodstream, impairing perceptual and motor skills, increasing the incidence of lane weaving in and out, and poor reaction time, very similar to alcohol. And the problem is that when law enforcement comes in hand, alcohol can be easily detected and measured in a person's system, where the levels of THC, although they can detect for the presence, really haven't developed a very good way of detecting the level of influence that it exerts on an individual. Teenagers who smoke marijuana and drive are twice as likely to be involved in a car accident. The combination of marijuana and alcohol use greatly increase the risk of car accidents than either drug alone. The most obvious reported psychological effects of marijuana on the mind includes euphoria and relaxation. That's very well known. But marijuana users who started before the age of 14 were more likely to exhibit psychosis. Again, were they more likely to develop psychotic episodes due to an underlying mental illness like schizophrenia? Or was the marijuana actually inducing the psychotic episodes? The jury's still out on that. Marijuana use has been linked to an increased risk for psychiatric disorders, depression, anxiety, and substance use disorder. But again, like it says, more common among those who had pre-existing risk factors to begin with, such as concomitant other substance abuse, stressful life situations, family history of substance abuse, and things of that sort. Other psychological effects includes alteration of perception and time, more significant if cognitive effects if it's used during adolescence. During adolescence and young adulthood, may decrease attention span, verbal memory, and IQ. That remains to be proven. There is a situation called anti-amotivational syndrome, whereas heavy marijuana users are unable to concentrate and are unmotivated, just kind of living in their own little world. I don't know how that really differs from many other drugs such as heroin and other depressants. The scientific research is sketchy at the very best, with a lot of mixed results. So let's talk about some of the physical effects of marijuana and cannabis on some of the major organ systems. If we first speak about the oral and gastrointestinal system, it's shown that users have reported an increase in appetite. I don't think that's any new concept, i.e. getting the munchies. However, body mass index of users compared to non-users are lower, and that could possibly be due to lower priority on paying attention to proper nutritional needs. Users have an increased risk of periodontal disease, and with that, there's more and more evidence that periodontal or gum disease can actually lead to other problems such as cardiovascular disease. On the respiratory system, THC acts as a bronchodilator and has been used to treat asthma. However, long-term use has been associated with an increased risk for respiratory problems or chronic respiratory problems. It's not been shown to increase the risk of lung cancer like traditional cigarettes, but there has been shown to be damage in cells lining the airway. On the cardiovascular system, cannabis has been shown to dilate peripheral blood vessels. That's why you tend to get the bloodshot eyes when somebody's been consuming marijuana. It also demonstrates an increase in heart rate and blood pressure. Over time, it's conceivable that that may overtax the cardiovascular system in the long run and lead to chronic cardiovascular conditions such as CHF, but that's not been proven yet. On the immune system, it's been shown to possibly suppress the immune system. increasing the likelihood of infections. And in doing so, it's because marijuana increases immune cells called myeloid-derived suppressor cells. And these cells suppress the immune system to keep it from going overboard. Also may decrease the effectiveness of cancer treatment, although it has been used traditionally as a palliative treatment to alleviate the nausea and vomiting that comes along with chemotherapy as a form of cancer treatment. Marijuana has significant effects on the reproductive system. First, as far as behavior, daily marijuana users are more likely to engage in risky sexual behavior, increasing the likelihood of STDs. And among men, users have higher rates of inability to achieve orgasm and erectile functioning. Marijuana has been shown to have negative effects on the male reproductive system, resulting in lower sperm count, problems in fertility, which could be an issue later on in life. In the brain, chronic marijuana users may experience cognitive deficits, although that's not been really shown to be proven over the long term. Smoking marijuana reduces a neurotransmitter acetylcholine in the hippocampus, which impacts memory. Again, short-term versus long-term remains to be seen. The textbook says it may increase the risk of schizophrenia. I personally don't believe that. I personally think that, just persons who are already prone to developing schizophrenia early in life are probably seeking some way to self-medicate to alleviate their mental symptoms. That's my opinion, though. That's not based on any evidence. Traditional medical applications for marijuana, approved and non-approved, include treatment for glaucoma or increased pressure within the ocular chamber. Marijuana has long been touted and advocated for treatment of glaucoma. However, its effectiveness for reducing the blood pressure behind the eye only lasts about 3 or 4 hours. So to effectively treat glaucoma, you have to constantly be smoking marijuana almost 24 hours, 7 days a week, which might be a little hard to achieve. It has been traditionally used to treat nausea and vomiting. It is an effective, what we call antiemetic, and it does come in an approved prescription form called Marinol. It's a prescription drug that contains THC, formulated in sesame oil. But there's other options for nausea and vomiting as well, things such as Reglan and Zofran. Touters of marijuana believe in its effect for asthma. It has been shown to expand lung capacity by dilating bronchial tubes. There's right now not too much research to support marijuana use for asthma relief. You got to understand that any type of product of combustion, especially with inhaled marijuana, is likely to trigger an asthma attack more than alleviate it. So I think the research is looking for other ways to introduce it into the body to treat acute asthma attacks. There's been a number of different studies showing the effectiveness of specifically cannabidiol for treatment of resistant epilepsy. There are certain genetic causes of epilepsy, one of which called Dravet syndrome, which tend to be completely refractory to all other treatments, and CBD has shown some mild effectiveness for these epilepsy disorders and treatment of seizures. As far as treating autoimmune diseases such as lupus, scleroderma, things of that sort, THC may be helpful in regulating the immune system. As we said before, the THC tends to suppress the immune system. These are diseases where the immune system is in overdrive, and instead of just attacking foreign pathogens, is attacking the body's own cells. Cannabinoids may help reduce inflammatory properties and help reduce these symptoms. Some additional medical uses include stimulating appetite, helping with non-cancer chronic pain, and somewhat of a muscle relaxant as well for injuries and muscle spasms. So the big controversy these days about marijuana is covering the legal aspects, situations of decriminalization and legalization. Now, understand the difference between these two terms. Decriminalization involves not putting people away for felony offenses simply for the fact of possessing marijuana. Over the years, there's been controversy based on these laws having racial overtones to them, being unjustly unfair. So many states have switched over, Oregon being the first one, to saying, enough is enough. If you're caught with a certain amount of marijuana, it shouldn't be anything more than just the equivalent of a ticket, such as jaywalking, as opposed to legalizing marijuana, where you're actually permitting the production, the sales, and distribution, regulating the trade, and collecting taxes on it as well. So states are passing medical marijuana laws and recreational laws. So again, the difference between medicinal marijuana and recreational marijuana, New York State has just recently passed the law allowing certain amounts of recreational marijuana. However, certain municipalities, certain districts, such as the town of Hempstead in Long Island, for example, are still prohibiting the sales and distribution of marijuana. Even though you could just probably drive 10 blocks away and to another town, such as Oyster Bay, and pick some up yourself. Even in states where it's legal, to some extent, workers may be fired if they test positive for marijuana. Just as the same for tobacco. And this is a subject of debate and controversy. Hospital in Pennsylvania, St. Luke's, has a strict no smoking policy for on the job and off the job. Does that violate constitutional rights? That question is obviously rhetorical. It's just something to think about. Some concerns about decriminalizing and legalizing marijuana. It may give the impression that drug is free from harm. Now, there's just like any substance, there's pros and cons, and there's always harms and risks with any substance of recreation. There's always been this concern that marijuana has been a gateway drug, a stepping stone theory, leading to more hardcore use of heroin and cocaine. So most people have used heroin and cocaine, have smoked marijuana, yet most marijuana smokers don't proceed to use other drugs. It's actually been shown that the use of marijuana is less likely to lead to hardcore drug use than alcohol and cigarettes, which are better predictors. Compared to alcohol and tobacco, marijuana use seems to be less harmful on the structure of families as well. So even though many states at the state level have adopted a legal marijuana policy, the federal government still has it banned as a Schedule 1 highly addictive, non-medicinal drug and still imposes legal sanctions against it. You see, on April 2nd, 2016, hundreds of Americans protested for the federal ban on marijuana in Washington, D.C. We'll see what happens as time passes by. The National Academies for Science, Engineering, and Medicine, formerly known as Institute of Medicine, released a report to the federal government and demonstrated that there is conclusive evidence that cannabinoids are effective for certain conditions, such as chronic pain in adults, antiemetics, or treatment for severe nausea and vomiting, and for a condition called muscle spasticity, which is severe contractions and spasm of muscles in people with multiple sclerosis. There's some moderate evidence that cannabinoids are effective for improving short-term sleep problems. Could be especially important for shift workers, people who work overnights and varying shifts, which has been shown to wreak havoc on the whole body's regulatory system. And some limited evidence for increasing appetite, improving things such as Tourette syndrome, which is a mild form of epilepsy, and anxiety and post-traumatic stress syndrome disorder as well. So to recap, this week's goals are to do the following: explain the history of marijuana use in the United States, describe the different species of marijuana and the forms in which they are taken, explain the extent of marijuana use and explain the risk and protective factors associated with its use, compare and contrast different methods of administration of marijuana, describe the process of vaping or dabbing and how it's different from smoking marijuana, synthesize the types of dependence associated with marijuana use, associate the behavioral, psychological, and cognitive effects, summarize the effects of marijuana on various body systems. Does marijuana contribute to mental illness, or is it simply correlated with mental illness, or is there no association whatsoever? Describe the medical conditions for which marijuana is prescribed, and then think of some arguments for and against the legalization of marijuana, which you probably already did in your discussion questions. And with that, have a great week, and we'll take this up next time.